Welcome to LinkedIn Live with personal brand authority, Lita Citroen. Lita is an award-winning executive coach, speaker, and author working with clients in over 30 countries. She helps professionals, entrepreneurs, and business leaders manage the way they're perceived by the people who matter most. From leadership development, executive presence, to strategic communications and social media positioning, Lita's work is thoughtful, motivating, and practical. Get ready for a great program. Here's Lita.
Well, hello. It is another LinkedIn Live session. My name is Lita Citroen, and I am going to be hosting the conversation, which I hope you have something to write with. Take notes, because we're going to have so much information to share. Before I introduce our special guest, I want to know where you're dialing in from. So this is always partly my favorite part of the program is tell us where you're dialing in from. Go ahead and put it in the chat. What city, what state, what country, what continent? Where are you reaching us today? We know how vast the landscape is of LinkedIn and would love to know where you're dialing in from. So today's topic is online influence. How do you position yourself in this crowded marketplace to stand out, capture attention, but do so in a meaningful way? We're going to be talking about different ways that you build your personal presence, your organizational presence, and the presence of your company. So we've got a fabulous program. I want to start off with another number because you know I love statistics. There are 5 billion with a B, users in social media today. That means your message, your ability to influence the conversation and the narrative the way you want is bumping up against a lot of other people who are trying to do the same thing. So today's conversation is going to cut through that noise and show you how to do it for yourself so that you can positively impact the target audiences that you serve. I thought to start us off, before I introduce my guest, I wanted to share with you the 5 top questions I get asked about online positioning. And I do most of my work with individuals. So I want to sort of put it in that context. And I see that you're all sending in where you're dialing in from. And boy, we have folks in the UAE, we have folks in England, in Reno, Toronto, and Switzerland. Oh, keep those cities and countries and continents coming into the chat. But these are the 5 questions I hear a lot. The first one is, can you have influence, be inspiring, and have impact if you're not on social media? And the answer is, sure, of course you can. You can curate an audience that is offline, that is attached to your message and is attached to what it is you're about in terms of your service. But I will say it's a lot harder. And where social media might have once been a nice to have, it's kind of an obvious choice to be able to scale. So if you have a very boutique offer, you have a very, very limited audience or client or team that you serve, you can, with a lot of strategy and perhaps some heavy lifting in the other marketing channels, build that influence without being on social media. For most of us, that's a much harder way to do it. The second question I get asked a lot is, how important is it to be authentic when you're building your online presence? And I know that with my guest, we're going to be talking about authenticity, but I would like to clarify the difference between authenticity and transparency, the way that I define it, okay? So authenticity means that if I ask you a question online, in a chat, in a conversation, and you answer, that you answer truthfully. So yes, you have to be authentic when you're online because you're building an authentic presence. You're building authenticity in how you will influence people. But transparency, the way I define it, is telling people everything. And if you've been in my previous LinkedIn Lives, or you've seen my LinkedIn learning programs, or you've read any of my books, you know that I'm a big believer in privacy. You don't have to tell people everything. So what you answer, what you share, what you comment on should be truthful for you, but it doesn't have to be the whole truth. You don't have to tell people about every trauma or dream or fear or rash that you've encountered. Number 3, don't you sacrifice privacy and control if you're online. And I will admit, I get a lot of this question from my folks coming out of the military, because social media, it sort of took its roots while these men and women were serving their country. So the idea of being vulnerable and authentic and sharing online feels very risky. And my answer is, you don't sacrifice privacy in the way that you're thinking. Let's face it, if somebody doesn't have a Facebook account or a LinkedIn profile, we can still find out about them. Some of it might require some, forensic social media investigation, but we can go online and find information. You get control when you manage and you are proactive about how you're going to show up online. So I don't think you lose control when you're involved in social media, especially a platform like LinkedIn. You are controlling every bit of that information you put out there. And that's a very common question I get, routinely, even today, that people fear that they're exposing themselves in an unnatural or unhealthy way because they're active on social media. Remember, you're controlling what goes into the keyboard and what you click when you click, enter or return. You're posting that information. So the last one, and I know we're going to talk about this more in a minute, but how much time do you really have to spend online in order to create influence? I get that question a lot because most of you that follow me know that I'm pretty active on a lot of different platforms. It lines up with my personality. It's my way of sharing a lot of information and gifting and giving. So I see it as a way to serve. And I spend a lot of time. Sabrina, who you might know from previous LinkedIn Lives, is monitoring the chat. She also helps me monitor and create those content pieces that we share on social media. So yes, I do a lot of my marketing for myself on social media. But if you're in a job search, you want to be findable. And that might mean being more active on a platform like LinkedIn than maybe when you're fully employed, where you're going to use LinkedIn to monitor and see what the conversations are and stay relevant. If you're an organization and you are in a fundraising mode, or you're in a rebuilding mode, or you're trying to hire, you're going to be using these platforms a little more aggressively than when you're in a different position of your calendar year. So I think we all use it differently depending on what our goals are. So how much time? I would say whatever the return on investment looks like. If you're spending a lot of time and you're not getting the results you want, maybe it's too much time. Back it down. Spend less time, maybe focus on more quality engagement, and see if that doesn't help you produce the results that you're looking for, whether it's job leads, interviews, volunteers or donors to your nonprofit, traffic to your website if you're a business, whatever the goal is. Test for yourself what that frequency and cadence looks like. All right. So with that framing in mind, I am so excited to introduce a very special person to me. Other than myself, you will be hard pressed to find anyone on this planet as passionate about branding as my friend and colleague, Lynn Weinman. She is the president and founder of a Nebraska-based organization called Kid Glove, which is a full-service branding advertising agency focused on really putting a megaphone in front of those that are doing good in the world. She always tells me she works with purpose-driven organizations, and I just love that. She's also the co-host of the Agency for Change podcast, which can be found at their website, kidglove.com, or on any major podcast provider. Sabrina's going to be sharing some links in the chat of some content and some ways you can reach Lynn. But I want to welcome you to the LinkedIn Live. I know people are really excited to hear from you and learn more about what you have to tell us about building presence and influence online. So welcome.
Lita, I'm so excited to be here. And thank you. Thank you for the gracious introduction. And wow, what great content you have already dropped already. What you shared earlier is pure gold.
Well, I appreciate that. I always like to start off, you got to come up with a little formula, and I start off with some information. But I know that people want to hear what you have to say. So in your world, in what you're seeing, why do you think it's important for people to build online influence today?
Yeah, absolutely. Lita, this just completely builds on your explanation of why you should be on social media, or if you can build your presence without. I think in today's world, the social media might be your first impression. Before
Mm.
someone even meets you, I know if I have a meeting or a call with somebody for the first time, I am Googling their name right away, and social media always comes up first. But then also after you meet, it's a good credibility reinforcer. So let's say you just had a first client interaction or interaction with a colleague, they might go next to your social media and reinforce what they found. But then beyond that, it's a great tool for relationship building. It's a great tool for staying in front of your audience. And it's a great tool for reinforcing your brand so people understand you.
Well, and we know that, for instance, 95% of recruiters are using
Oh,
tools like LinkedIn. I just spoke at a panel of employers who hire military talent in New York, and one of the things they talked about is if I get a resume and I don't quite understand this person's background, or if I just want to see a more holistic view of who they are and the kinds of things they comment and post on, these employers are going to LinkedIn to see more than you're going to put on the resume, which means
right.
the resume should match what you're posting
Oh,
on LinkedIn.
yes. That's a big credibility there too, or credibility builder to have those two match. I think everything you've said there is 100% Lita.
What about for professionals that aren't job seeking? What are some of the things you think, like you and I, we're not looking for jobs.
No.
What are professionals that aren't in a job search able to do when it comes to online influence, do you think, using some of
Yeah.
these tools?
We talk a lot about using social media to build your thought leadership position as an individual.
Mm.
So, you and I, as company founders, working with people, our presence online adds to the presence of our companies. And so, building that thought leadership, our individual expertise also then lends credibility to our companies as well.
Wow, I love that. I hadn't even made that connection. And as Lynn and I go through this conversation, if you've got questions or thoughts are coming up, go ahead and drop them in the chat and we'll either answer them in the moment or we'll sort of tackle them at the end when Sabrina gives us some questions on the screen. So let's shift to business for a second.
Yeah.
So businesses that are trying to build their brand, we know that one mistake can be problematic. Sometimes businesses try to take a risk or they try to move outside of their normal marketing, and you're focused on branding, marketing, and advertising.
Yeah.
But how does the online space come into play there?
Yeah, I think your online presence should be so consistent with your in-person presence. I always say that if you have a certain way that you treat people, your customers, your clients, if they were to be in your physical space, they should feel treated the same way on your online presence as well. And that extends to all of your LinkedIn channels. So if your voice or your approach is high service, high touch, caring, considerate, then that should be your approach on social media as well. Likewise, if your approach is more punchy, irreverent, then that should be your approach on social media. So everything should be consistent throughout. And what I like to say about consistency is consistency translates online to credibility, quality, and trust. If people have comfort in the way you're going to present yourself and comfort through they know what to expect, that is going to translate to a great benefit for you.
And even though we were talking about companies for a moment, it's the same thing applies to people, right?
There's so much similarity. There's so
much.
much similarity in personal branding and corporate branding and nonprofit branding online.
Well, and to your example, think about if you were applying for a job and you see this fun, hip, sort of playful website and this fun, hip social media profiles, and then you go to the company and it's a box with no windows and everybody looks upset, right?
Yeah.
The experience just fell flat. So it's not just your customers, but it's your employees and your referral sources. And
Very
you've got
much.
to always think about not perfection, but to your point, consistency.
Yeah. I think too, you said something earlier about, I loved your definition of authenticity and transparency, but being authentic online means that everything is not necessarily always, perfectly
Coiffed.
coiffed. Thank you. Coiffed is the word I was trying to think of. And don't make me spell that either, right? But sometimes being real online builds you a lot of credibility as well. So and I also think if you're going to be inauthentic, online is where you're going to get tripped up. Social media is where people are going to call you out for those inauthentic places or things that you do.
Well, or the inconsistencies, right?
Yes.
And I remember during the pandemic, we saw so many examples of people who were tone deaf, right? A
Yes.
celebrity is talking about, having to quarantine in their mega mansion, on the beach with the pool and the rest of us are going, yeah, we're trying to find toilet paper, right?
Yeah.
Like, cry me a river. And
Right.
and they were trying to be authentic and relatable, but they missed the point. And so it's tough. And the reason I make the distinction between authenticity and transparency, I think, is also for kids, because we see a lot of these, young people being on social media and sharing their vulnerabilities, not just mom and dad aren't home, which is a risk, but these are the thoughts that I'm having. And while we want them to always get help and we want them to find a way to share what they need assistance with.
Yeah.
Those vulnerabilities can also make them targets. And I think as adults, we sometimes feel immune from that. But to your point, we don't get to take it back once we've posted it.
I think that's a really good point. And I think that, there's also a difference between appropriate authenticity and just going way out there too, and we've got some content, even like if you're a company or an individual thinking about speaking out on maybe a difficult social issue, there's definitely some questions you should ask yourself. Will most of my audience agree with that point? Do I have anything to add? How will it make my employees or the rest of my audience feel? So, all of those are things that you should be really, really pay attention to. But we've all also seen those examples where somebody might speak out on issues of sustainability, but then get caught not living those. Or I think issues of culture maybe might talk about having a great culture. An opportunity for a disgruntled employee to call you out on that as well. So whatever you're speaking about anywhere, but social media in particular, make sure that you're living it.
Well, and Sabrina, if you could find it and maybe pop it in the comments. Last year, I did a program actually with LinkedIn about the idea of executive voice. And I know you and I were having a little bit of this conversation before we got started. To your point about, are you the right person to speak on that topic? And so, what are the guardrails? Are you speaking about something that's culturally or socially a hot topic? So you're jumping into the conversation, but if you're not the right person or you haven't established credibility in that space, it could look tone deaf and it could look opportunistic. So I know Sabrina will find that link. It's on my YouTube channel, but it was a great program I did with the head of culture for IBM about the idea of how far out ahead of your skis should you go.
I love the way that you said that. And just want to note that Sabrina is the best.
Yes. Sabrina is, yes, all mine. So let's talk about a difference that you and I also run into. So you work primarily with organizations, right?
Yes.
Purpose-driven, mission-focused organizations.
Yes.
I'm working more with individuals who are purpose-driven, mission-driven. Where do you see the difference? Let's talk a little bit about that.
I mean, even starting, so many similarities. You should either have a corporate brand or a personal brand that you stay consistent to. You should have a content plan. Like you should know where you're going. So those things are the same. I think the one nice thing about doing personal social media is there tends to be less regulations. Sometimes, depending on what industry you're in or who you're representing, there's rules and regulations. One other nice difference about posting personally versus as a business is, I know when you get into social media, we all start to talk about the algorithm, the thing that decides how many people see our posts. But, you know, almost always the algorithm allows more people to see our personal posts than our business posts. So if you can repost things as an individual from your business, that can be really helpful. As an individual, you can be more vulnerable, I believe. You can, maybe share more personal things than you would as a business. As a business, you really have to think about the fact that whatever you put out there needs to represent the organization. It's representing the employees. It's representing your clients and customers, even in some cases. And so you need to be more sensitive to that.
I know you have something you talk about, like brand archetypes, when it comes to putting together social media for a lot of your clients. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Oh, you know what? You just shared one of my favorite things. I could talk for an hour about this, but I promise I won't. And if anybody wants to learn more about brand archetypes, the best source out there is a book that's available on Amazon. It's called The Hero and the Outlaw, and it outlines 12 brand archetypes. It's based on the work of Carl Jung, and it really helps you define who you are and what voice you should use. So for example, there's a caregiver archetype that is really, out helping overcome human vulnerabilities. There is a jester archetype that's all about having fun. There's an outlaw that's irreverent. So if you as an individual or as a company define your brand archetypes, then you can really lean into that for an additional level of consistency to make sure you have a consistent personality. When you're an individual, it's easier maybe to know what your personality is and convey that. When you're an organization, that's a little bit harder because you're representing a bigger thing.
You were talking earlier about, the individual can take a position and that the algorithms typically like individuals rather than business accounts. Are there times where it makes more sense for the business to post rather than the CEO? How does that voice play out?
I really think overall it's good to combine both into the strategy. So if there's something going on with the business posting that is extremely promotional, or maybe is on a topic that the CEO is less comfortable with, that should be a business post for sure. Oftentimes the strategy we like to employ is the business will post first, and then the CEO will repost and share, or in some cases, strategically will go the other way around. But it all should be very planned out. We're all into let's have a really great content calendar and understand what we want to say and when we're going to say it.
So when you think about content calendars or editorial calendars, I wanted to ask a question of the audience. If you guys can put in the chat, are you more thinking about this conversation from your personal perspective, your company's perspective, or your nonprofit or organization's perspective? Let us know which perspective you want to hear more about so that as Lynn and I continue to talk, we can make sure that we're hitting on what you came here to hear. So go ahead and drop that in the chat. Is it your personal, visibility and ability to have influence? Are you thinking more about the company, whether you're the founder or maybe you're the head of social media for the company, or is it organizational, a nonprofit? So as those come in, one of the things you and I talk about is feedback, right? How to gauge what's working. And the algorithms obviously tell us how many people saw it. We can see how many people liked and shared and comment. What other kind of feedback can either people or organizations and companies look
Yeah,
for?
I think the first thing is everything you just said. Make sure that you're taking time throughout a week, a month, a quarter, whenever you evaluate, make sure that you're looking at that because it really, really tells a story. At Kid Club, we always look at impressions because that tells us how well we're managing the algorithm to get the message out. We look at engagement because that generally tells us that that's something that our audience likes to see or hear. And then reading those comments and analyzing the comments, all of those three things are extremely, extremely helpful, Lita.
Well, and I'm seeing a lot of the comments coming in that people are listening to the conversation from a personal perspective. Some people are saying that, they work in a social media capacity for their organization, or, maybe they are a founder. It sounds like we have some entrepreneurs paying attention. Getting that insight into the analytics. I know one thing that we do at my company is we look at them at a macro level because it's really easy to look at one post and say, if it's a personal post from me rather than Lita 360 and say, oh my gosh, that one went really viral. Like let's reshare it over and over, or let's post things exactly like that. But I think you also have to look in context, right? Was it something that was really timely that we shared? Was it a certain time of day that worked better?
Yes, absolutely.
What other things are you seeing?
Yeah, well, I even like to, on my own personal social media, I like to dig in. You can get the analytics on an individual post, and you can see once a post has hit a certain threshold, you can see what areas of the country are engaging. You can see what companies are engaging. You can see by job position or title who's engaging. And that too, I think, is really helpful because if you think about who your audience is, and we all should be trying to determine who is it we're trying to reach and what are we trying to accomplish. You can really say, hey, maybe I had a post that went viral. There were all kinds of people seeing it and commenting on it, but maybe they weren't the people that I really wanted to see and comment on it too. So engagement and impressions can't always be the end all be all in the analytics review.
I love that you're saying that because I do think, when we think about online influencers, we think about how many followers they have. We also know today that people can buy followers, buy engagement. So how authentic is it really? I just wanted to share real quick. I remember it was probably a couple of years ago, maybe it was during the pandemic, but I had recorded a post, a video. My hair looked great. Like my lighting was perfect. I was like, but it was a very authentic post, right? I was sharing something I was feeling and observing. And I remember I just decided in the moment not to have, the subtitles put on and not to have any kind of intro. I just shared it on LinkedIn. And I said, look, this one is a little raw. And it went crazy.
Yeah.
Just to the point where it was almost embarrassing how many people connected with the message, appreciated the fact that, it wasn't airbrushed or anything. Like, we don't do that, but I'm just saying it wasn't coiffed. I was coiffed. My hair did look great.
All right.
But the idea is it was a real human to human message. And I think so much of social media gets away from that. And if you're a job seeker, you've got to be managing the optics. If you're trying to grow and get promoted and get additional resources and be seen differently by senior management, you absolutely have to maintain a certain presence, but don't let people forget that you're a human being with a heartbeat. And that's where authenticity versus transparency really comes back into play.
Lito, that is such a great example of online relationship building, right? Since the pandemic, we don't get out as much as we used to. We don't see as many people in person. We maybe don't have the same opportunities, but when we're online, we have the opportunity to build relationship with people that we wouldn't see. I mean, think about it today. We have people from all over the country, all over the world that if we wouldn't be able to talk to if it weren't for a social media platform like LinkedIn.
Yeah. And I remember when I started my business 15 years ago and connecting with someone on Twitter back then. And this person was, I don't even remember what country they were in. And I was getting started and they were farther ahead and they sent me some information. And I'm like, I mean, how generous,
Yes,
to just help somebody on the other side of the world because they were starting their path and the other person was farther along. And that is the beauty of social media. 100%.
I think so too. You know, Lita, I think another question that I get often is which social media platforms should we be on? And I think it's particularly if you're an individual, and I know a lot of people today are thinking about their individual social media, it is really difficult to manage all of the social medias, right? I mean, and so I usually say pick two, but if you can handle more, but really think about, once again, who your audience is, who you're trying to reach, what you're comfortable with, and lean into the right social media. Personally, I love LinkedIn because it's where my business community is. It's where I learn. But if you are more reaching out to other individuals, then you might look at some of the other social media, and they all change and trend and do different things. So pick the ones that work the best for you. I've been hearing for years that Facebook is going away, but yet a lot of people still have great following and are doing great work on Facebook. So, don't just lean into the trendy things you see and hear. Make sure you're leaning into your analytics as well to decide which channels you really can be on. And then you have to optimize the content for the channel. What you post on LinkedIn is not going to work on Instagram. It's not going to work on Twitter. So figure out, the best formatting for that channel.
Well, and we've got a few minutes left before we get to questions. So any of you that have questions, or if there's something we haven't covered or you want us to talk more about, get those questions ready. Go ahead and put them in the chat so we can get them ready to answer. But in the work that you're seeing, what are people doing right? And where could we learn to be better?
Yeah, I think the number one thing what makes me excited is when I see somebody on social media, whether they're an individual, whether they're an organization, or whether they're a for-profit business, you can tell when somebody really has a plan and they really have a brand strategy, and that they're working towards something. There's not a lot of randomness. It's all working together. That makes me really happy because you can tell that it's reflective of an overall strategy. So I think that's one of the things that is right. One of the things that I think is wrong that still happens and breaks my heart is when I hear somebody say, I hired an intern to do my social media, or I hired a student group, or my niece or my nephew. And that can really work for you as long as it's linked into and I said LinkedIn, not as the social media, but as being a link too. As long as it's tied to your overall strategy, then it's great. But social media should be representing your overall strategy.
Well, and since I'm in the reputation business, I mean, you are handing someone the keys to your reputation. And I see individuals doing it. It's not just organizations. I see individuals that are handing over who they are, their credibility, their value proposition. And I tell, again, there's a total way to do that, but you don't just hand it over and walk away.
Just hand it over without a strategy.
It's so risky, because the second that something goes wrong, no one's going to care about the person who posted it. They're going to care about the voice it came from. And that's your voice.
Yep. That's 100% true, Lita. I think that's perfect. Really true. I think the other thing is make sure you're differentiating. The human brain likes to ignore things that it expects. So as long as you're within your brand and your strategy, make sure that you're different from others. So if you're a company, look at who the other companies are in that consideration set. If you're an individual, marketing yourself as a coach or an entrepreneur or a thought leader, well, who are the other options that are in your consideration set? One thing I love about LinkedIn is they generally will tell you. There generally is a bar at the side of your profile that says others in the similar space. And so take a look at that and make sure you're not doing something that's exactly the same as someone else. Stand out.
Right. Stand out, be authentic, be consistent. Well, before we get to questions, one of the things I do every time we do a LinkedIn Live is I end with some action items. So,
Oh, yes.
folks listening, these are the things you need to do now with the context we've just given you. First, be clear on your why. Why are you on social media? Why are you spending the time? Why are you targeting that audience? So again, if you're employed and you're happy with your job, you just don't feel like your boss understands you, or maybe senior leaders don't recognize what you offer, then that's your why. And that has to get tied in to your social media posts. It's okay to be active on social media and not be a job seeker, right? Most of us are in that camp, but really think about what you represent and why you're engaged. Number two, clarify your competitive advantage to what Lynn was just talking about. How are you different? How are you similar? That's fine, but how are you different and unique and compelling and relevant to the people that are looking for you? It is so wonderful to be yourself and have someone say, you're exactly who I've been looking for. If you represent yourself differently online, then they're going to be attracted to that different and not who you are. So understand your competitive advantage. And number three, and we talked about this a lot, is have a strategy. If you're an individual and you want to be more visible, you want your passions to be more known, you want people to see you a different way, create a strategy for that. It doesn't have to be a formal editorial calendar with all of the different tabs that companies use, but make sure that you're posting regularly, you're sharing in a regular tone, you're commenting and celebrating the success of other people. Have a strategy so that you get into that cadence and it becomes second nature. And number four, and this is a tricky one, periodically evaluate your connections and contacts. You may have connected with someone when you were in school, and that person today might be working in an area that you don't agree with or posting content that you find off-putting or offensive. Well, that person is still a connection. So I always, like, once a year, I go through and I sort of scrub my social media just to make sure I'm not sending the message that I am condoning behavior or messaging that is not aligned with my brand. And it doesn't mean that their other person is wrong. I just have to manage my brand. So think about that. Be very careful about the people you connect with. And then the last one, and this might be hard for some of us, starting right now, try to speak your truth, right? If you are passionate about something, maybe you don't know everything, but you're open to learning, right? Inclusivity, diversity, these are topics that we hear about, and some people don't necessarily know what that means. Be truthful about what you're comfortable with and be truthful about who you are. So between, knowing your why, clarifying your competitive advantage, developing that online strategy, look through your contacts and connections and make sure that everyone is also getting value from you. And then always speak your truth, right? Think about the things you're going to post this afternoon. Are they truthful? Are they real? Are they genuine? Or are you just trying to, jump in a conversation? So what I'd love to ask the audience, in addition to sending in your questions, is what is one thing you've learned today that you're going to start acting on? Hopefully those 5 you'll start acting on. But what's one thing that as soon as you're done with this live program, or maybe you're watching the recording, what's one thing you're going to do today? Go ahead and put that in the chat as well. Lynn, as we wait for questions or thoughts to come in, anything else that you would like to share that didn't come up that we can put a nice bookend on this program with?
As I was hearing you with those action items, which were so great, Lita, I wanted to reinforce one thing. As you think about documenting your brand plan, your strategy, your content calendar, you can go online and see things that are so complex and will suck up all of your time. None of us has any extra time. I'm a big fan of the one sheet of paper plan, or if you're digital, one visible view, right? But I really think try and keep your voice, your tone, your plan, keep it as simple as possible, because that's what you're going to use and refer to. If you get too complicated, you're more likely just to file that away and not go back to it.
So Richard is saying he's going to work on being authentic. Can't wait to see what those posts and that engagement looks like. Rain has a comment. My instinct is to behave like myself online, unapologetically. I love that phrase. That's like my phrase. Unapologetically authentic while being professional was the right choice. No one wants to connect with a robot.
I love that.
Thank you, Rain. That is fabulous. Vilma says, evaluate connections. So definitely want to be mindful of that. A LinkedIn user who we don't know their name. I'm afraid to be too genuine and risk being disqualified from job opportunities. I'm going to tackle this. And then Lynn, I want to hear what your thoughts
Absolutely.
are. Because boy, I get that. I really get that. So again, think about what is your brand strategy for yourself? How do you want to be known? If there's a topic that is within that perception you're building, you have to tell us what you feel about that. Because what if a company wants to hire you and that thing that you're not comfortable talking about is everything they stand for? Hopefully you wouldn't go as far as getting a job and having to do that. But if there's something that isn't germane to your brand, how you want to be known, do you have to post about it? You can still be authentic. What you share should be genuine, but you don't have to. Lynn, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, Lita, I think balance is the key. I think that's a great comment. But I think balance is the key. There are things that we all think or feel that we shouldn't say out loud, right? And I think you use that same judgment online. You don't want to be somebody that you're not, but there are things that are just not appropriate for online. If somebody were to Google your name and that were the first thing that popped up, is that what you really want to represent yourself by? Somebody told me once, never put anything online that you wouldn't want like on a thought bubble over your head whenever you walked around town, right? So just make sure you've got that balance.
Well, and to the question, I mean, it's a fabulous question, and we all struggle with this. I had a woman recently in a workshop tell me, she's a mom, her kids are really important to her, work-life balance is critical. She's afraid to post that so much about her family and things that they do because she doesn't want an employer to think that she won't be as committed to the job, that she's going to be wanting to, watch the clock for 5 o'clock. And again, I think using the platforms as they're designed. So yes. LinkedIn is not designed to talk about your children and your vacations and your hobbies. It's a professional site. We need to be genuine, but we don't have to talk about all aspects of our life. Facebook, Instagram, some of those platforms we can. And yes, you can mark those platforms as private. Nothing you post on the internet is ever private. Please know that.
Yes.
But if you create some deterrence, it does make it a little harder for a recruiter to see that. But if that's important to you, if knowing that you're not going to have to travel or work 80-hour weeks is important to you, I guess I don't know why it would be a negative to have an employer know that you have a family. And that's a huge part of your life.
Yeah.
So
I think, Lita, everything you said there is correct. And I think balance is an important part of where we are today as employers trying to provide that balance. Where I think you need to be really careful on your personal social media is particularly during the pandemic and sometimes during political campaigns. Some of us get very angry about issues. and we tend to voice that anger on social media, right? And so I think that's a good place where balance is key. So if you are sharing that anger on your social media, that might be the first thing a potential employer or potential client sees about you. And that's probably not the first impression that you want to have. Posting lovely pictures of your family or your hobbies or things like that, I think that's fantastic. People know you're human. We want to, in this era of chat GPT and AI, I think we're all hungry for more human connection, and posts that make you seem like a lovely human are usually positive.
Well, and to your point about posting when you're angry, Brett Neiser, who I remember from a long time ago, Brett, we've been connected for a long time, says never post when triggered.
Yes.
Right? Take a walk. If you're angry, if you're upset, if you're triggered by something, that is not the point, right? Cancel culture happens. And you all know that I do reputation repair work. And a lot of times it's someone who was triggered and gets into the conversation. They have no business being there.
Yeah.
Because of the state of mind, again, you don't get to take it back. So
you don't get to take it back.
Definitely. So a lot of folks are saying authenticity, moderation. One LinkedIn user says, I don't talk about my life at all. And now I'm seeing young people do nothing but self-promote. They have huge followings. LinkedIn is becoming a lot like Facebook. You know, I take a little exception to that. I think during the pandemic, LinkedIn released the strings a little because everyone was so striving for social connection. I do think that they are tightening it back up, and I do see that. Anyway, oh my gosh, I know we're coming up on time here, but I see people talking about Chat GPT. And yeah, if you're a really good writer, isn't it funny that somebody might think that you used AI to generate that?
Yeah, that's right. That's
wow,
right.
no, I wrote my own books. I can promise you that. It looks like everyone is going to take some great action, looking at their connections, looking at their authenticity. Be sure to connect with others. You know, if you want to put your LinkedIn profile in the chat so that other people can connect with you, I think that would be a great thing to do before we sign off. Len, you and I can talk
I'd love to connect with everybody too and see your content and how you're using this. So please feel free to reach out to me online as well.
You'll definitely find Lynn on LinkedIn. And I want to let you know next month, because we're doing these every month, we're talking about effective communication. And I don't want to give it away, but my special guest is someone who I've worked with for a long time. He is an expert. He does instructional design work, so much good information about the framing of conversation and the framing of successful communication. So be sure to, follow me, follow my newsletter so you get notified about all that. I mean, Lynn, what a pleasure to not only see your face, but to have this conversation and share this wonderful information. I hope everyone will continue to drop your LinkedIn in the profile, follow us, connect with us, and join us next time. Lynn, thank you. Thank you.
Lita, thank you. And thank you, everyone. It's so great to be in community like this.
And thank you, Sabrina, for making us look really good. Until next time, looking forward to it, and keep building those brands. Bye, everyone.